Hi, my name's Wendy Artnowski. I'm going to try to explain some of the advanced trim techniques that I've used over the last 35 years to trim stunt ships for a little bit better performance than if left untrimmed. And I'd like to show you some of the little ways that I've done this, the ways I've gathered knowledge. I guess one of the things I'd like to start with is, if you haven't seen Tape 1 Basic Trim, you're probably going to want to see that as a prerequisite to this one. These two tapes, and there probably will be tape 3, 4, and 5 somewhere later on in the future. You could always find out by just giving me a call or dropping me a note. I'd like to try to get as much of the information as I can down on video, for the simple reason that maybe someday I'll pass away and I can leave this to the hobby as a little legacy, in the same way many of the other people have put their things in print or in some other medium, have passed on the information they've learned. I guess one of the first points I want to make is that all through my life, even when I was a boy, I try to make a collection of virtually everything that's ever been written about stunt. You can tell by looking at these notebooks, and I have about 40 of them. I have them segregated out in this particular one is the columns that were written by Bob Hunt and myself during that period, finishing articles like this one, articles about handles. Here's a finishing article I wrote. And if you notice through some of these articles, there's a lot of good information that hasn't changed in the last 20 or 30 years. This is rock solid information on how to get basic trimming done, basic paint jobs, basic assembly of airplanes. There's one Bob wrote about the wheel pants, was real good. There's been some guest columns in here. There's been some kind of funny ones. There's been some that have been just outstanding. I also have collected another book, and you can see this is another book similar to that I have well, just endless amounts, endless volumes of things written about stunt. So my first suggestion is, if we're going to talk about improving your stunt pattern, one of the first things we ought to talk about is, where are you going to get this information? And obviously one source of information is Flying Models has a stunt column, regardless of whether Billy Simons wrote it or Bobby Hunt or myself. It's a good source of information. Model Aviation has a stunt column. The videos of which you're watching one right now are a source of information. And various articles that are written in the magazine. Is one by Tom Dixon, if we go into that. Obviously the first thing you have to understand about advanced trim techniques is that there are several approaches. They're all valid. They all work well for other people. And in other words, in this one I'm showing, this is Tom Dixon's Mercos, which he makes run relatively well. It's a radial mount. That's one approach. Aluminum landing gear is another approach. Planes that he's designed, Thunderbird, various ways to build wings, tails, fuselages, nose constructions. And you should be aware is Jimmy Casale's Spectron. There's a lot of different approaches that work well for different people. There's no one approach that's going to work well for everybody. So without belaboring the point of actually where you can get this information, just realize that there are a lot of valid approaches, and they do vary. And we're only going to speak about the ones that have worked well for me. A lot of what I've done is things that I've learned from Big Jim Greenaway, which is a basic stunt approach, and that's one we'll be discussing in this tape. The first thing I want to do is just look at some of the maneuvers and some of the little ways you can cheat on improving your flying without ever touching the airplane. This obviously is just a rough draft of what a reverse wingover looks like. One of the things you'll notice, if the judge is standing right here, one of the ways all the experts wind up cheating is by radiusing into this corner relatively smoothly. When you wind up snapping this corner violently, the plane will usually go up like that. If you make a smooth transition into here, this would be the first thing I would suggest to people if I was coaching them. Because you're right in front of the judge, he has a very poor perspective on how sharp that corner is. So a smooth transition into the wingover so that you don't wind up going over like that. That would be tip number one that I could effectively give you. Tip number 2 is coming down out of the wing over. Obviously, you'd like to cut the circle right in half. Is if you see that you're on an angle, very slight angle, don't make a correction, because the correction is going to be worse than having the angle. I'd let the angle sit a little wrong, and then again, here I wouldn't want to snap it. I'd try to get a nice crisp corner, but you'll notice if you try to hit this corner violently, the plane at this point in time is always full of fuel, and it's more than likely going to come out a little bit like that, or it's going to come out violent and then radius up on an angle. So a nice transition into a wing over. This is the point at which the plane is the most nose heavy. You'd like to kind of radius in, cheat the entry a little bit. Try to cut the circle right in half. Don't make a correction on the angle. And in the pullout, try to get a smooth pullout rather than have the pullout be violent and maybe go up on an angle, or violent and maybe give you something like that where there's a lot of corrections. A judge is really going to downscore you for the corrections more than maybe the lack of a real sharp corner here. Now, on the way back over, remember, you're coming back in front of the judge. You can cheat. The corners that you do right in front of the judge can always have a radius in them. What you want is to get a smooth transition back over the circle. Try to cut it right in half. And then on your inside pullout, obviously it's this last pullout, as you pull out into level flight, that's going to be the most obvious, and that's just before he's thinking about, well, do I give this fella 28, a 30, 32? What am I going to give him? So again, a smooth pullout, nice and flat, coming down and pulling out nice and flat, I would say is your best chance, especially at advanced level flying when you're not a super expert, as opposed to a really violent corner and then something like that. I think you get your best bet by the entries in front of the judges being a little bit soft, the pullouts being a little bit soft but very smooth, and definitely not giving it one of those. One of those is definitely going to be the least impressive, and it'll probably set the stage for your round loops and other maneuvers being judged at a lower than normal number of 28 rather than a 30 or whatever. A nice smooth wing over, even if the corners are a little radiused, especially the ones in front of the judge, is never going to hurt your overall score. It hurts a lot less than you think. Okay, the next maneuver from the pilot's point of view is going to be round loops. Now you can identify trim problems if your loops tend to look like this. They're flat on the top. If that's what your inside loops look like, if their length is longer than the height, if this is too long and it tends to be flat on the top, if you get this like it's going over a waterfall, a typical thing would be it comes up here and goes, oh, Jesus, oh, we're not going to make it, and then, whoa, oh, we're not going to make it, we're not going to make it, whoa. Lack of power. Identify what the problem is. This is a trim problem, lack of power. Not enough tip weight. One of the trade-offs you'll find is if you have a weak power package, a too small diameter prop, an engine that is not running properly. If an engine makes the same power here as it makes here, these loops are going to be egg-shaped. If you're running a normal, traditional OS Max Fox 35 motor run where it gets to about here and it changes, breaks into a two-cycle, when it breaks into a two-cycle, those loops are going to come right around with no problem. This is a characteristic of an engine that doesn't have a 2.4 run. Whether it's an engine that just physically can't run like a stunt engine, or it just overall doesn't have enough power even though it is 2.4. This is always a lack of power. It could be not enough tip weight. You'll notice the more tip weight you put in the airplane, the rounder round loops will get inside and outside. When you don't have enough tip weight, the aircraft will kind of float around the top. You'll kind of get funny shapes like that. That'll be a typical thing that happens. Also, another thing I want to mention while we're talking about inside loops. If, for instance, you're in a flight and you happen to get a lean run, a little leaner than you'd like, and you're going into your, just here, before you start the inside loop, take a step toward the airplane to bleed off some speed. And you'll notice rather than a plane doing this and going way up out of control, you can bleed off a little bit at airspeed here and it'll come right around. and you'll cheat the system. Best person I've ever seen at doing this is Jimmy Casale. He takes a step toward the airplane to bleed off the airspeed and then get that plane tracking real nice through the maneuvers. That's an excellent tip to remember. Any maneuver where the plane is going too fast in level flight, take a step toward the airplane just before you apply up control. That's a really excellent tip. Obviously inverted flight, 4 to 6 feet. If you have a nice level control, your plane is probably in pretty good trim. If you notice, here's the flight circle, here's the pilot, the wind is blowing this way, and as you're flying into the wind, the plane will want to go up. As you're flying downwind, the ship will want to go down. So what typically happens is just before you get to the point, maybe about here, where the plane is going upwind, you might want to apply just a little bit of down elevator. And on this side, just as you pass the point, right about here, you'll want to give it a little bit of up elevator to maintain that level track. Another little tip is, I've noticed Bob Barron is real good at doing this, is to tow the airplane. Physically apply tension to the lines at this point and take a little bit of a step toward the plane at this point. In other words, you can level off the flight height by walking toward the airplane upwind and pulling on the lines a little bit downwind. It'll kind of keep an equilibrium then. Another thing this allows you to do is maintain a constant speed throughout the circle. Normally up here the ship will slow down. Downwind it'll speed up. Obviously when it speeds up, you're going to have a little bit of a problem maintaining level flight. You notice the people that have excellent inverted flight or excellent level flight, the plane is usually not trimmed a whole lot different than ships that don't fly well upside down. It's pilot technique, and this is an excellent way to just cheat the system a little and make your flying a little bit more presentable than it otherwise normally would be. Again, we'll go through each maneuver and just try to give you little things that I think are tips that you might want to try to improve the overall performance of the airplane. Now outside loops are a completely different phenomenon than inside loops. When you come around on an outside loop, especially in this part up at the top, okay, you can deal with the fact that if this gets flat up at the top, it's the same, it's lack of power. Another factor here is GP. If the plane tends to go over the top GPing, you probably might want to try a little bit less diameter on the prop or a wiggly rudder. A Rabe rudder helps on outside loops, especially with a large diameter prop. Typically a 60 will run a 12 to a 13-inch prop. A Rabe rudder is a helpful trim device. On smaller ships under 12 inches, maybe 11 and a half, not really a necessity, but it never hurts. The Rabe rudder will make the correction for you when it's properly adjusted and to get this to tuck under just nice. When you see it kind of free flighting over here, you know you either have a lack of power or you need a little more rudder offset. The planes that I've made with Rabe rudders have all been excellent in the outside loop maneuver. And that's one of the things, and you might want to call Jim Greenaway up and discuss this option with him. His phone number is 1-718-529-4631. An excellent source of information. Excellent source of realistic, helpful information, and I would suggest you take advantage of his technology. It's certainly something that's available to everybody. Now let's talk about inside square loops from the pilot's perspective. An inside square loop realistically it should be as long as it is high. Of course, rule book, I won't get into a discussion of rule book techniques because it's just not appropriate. Flying a rule book pattern very seldom, in my opinion, would, and it's certainly my own personal opinion, flying a rule book pattern is not the way to win contests. Impressing people is how to win contests. What impresses people is hitting this last corner. Hitting this corner, being at 4 to 6 feet, and coming out dead flat without a bobble. Coming out of this corner either with a radius or coming out of it violently and going into some correction. No good, no good. what impresses the hell out of judges at every Nats that I've ever been to is you can fudge here, you can fudge here, you can fudge here. The length can be a little wrong, the height can be a little wrong. But if you can come down out of that maneuver and put it 4 to 6 feet on the ground and hold it dead flat in the pullout, this is going to get you maximum points every time. Every time. I'm sure there's judges out there that are saying, oh, no, I judge the rule book and I judge this, and I've heard all those arguments. And when I go to the Nationals, this is what wins Nationals every time. So take that with a grain of salt. It's my opinion for sure. I would certainly, if you're going to make the loops a little bit higher than you should, if you're going to fly at 50 degrees, let them be equivalent in length. You don't want to fly what's known in the East Coast as cigarette boxes, square loops that look like that. You don't want to fly rectangles that look like that. You want to try to keep it symmetrical. Again, if the plane gets soft up at the top, if you have a problem with these two corners or it gets soft at the top, it's usually lack of power, or it could be a trim tab on the wing. Two things that it very likely would be. And it would always help if you have that added speed coming into the maneuver. If you're going a little bit faster than you want to, right here, just before you hit this corner, take a step into the model, go up and hit that corner. That's the best trick in model aviation. If you don't get anything else from this tape except stepping into the plane at that corner, you will have gotten your $15 worth. So we'll leave this at this just to identify it, move on to the outside square loops. Outside square loops. Obviously, one of the common errors of the advanced flyers is to fly up like this and then dive down. That's really not a good idea. I've made that more than it actually is. Not a good idea. This will not get you maximum points. You want to try to get the ship at 45 degrees and then just turn that first corner. Now, a trick that I use all the time is when I get right at this corner, right here, I take a step toward the plane. That slows down the descent. It bleeds off 4 to 5 miles an hour of speed. When I hit this corner here, I take another step at the model. Now the plane is going real slow as it possibly can. And right here, I can fly a nice flat. I have this in complete control. Right here, here and here, these two corners here, not that important. This is not where you're going to get a 38 or 39 point maneuver. Right here is to bleed off speed, dive down, hold this leg flat. It's this leg here that's the most important part of the maneuver. This is the one that's going to buy you those Nats victories or those top fives or whatever it is. These maneuvers, these corners can kind of be less important, but this one had better be flat to the ground, and it had better not be one of those, or you're not going to, and it better not angle up at an angle. And obviously the way you get this, step into the model, bleed off the speed, try to hold this as flat as you can. A trick Mike Rogers taught me is when you make this cut here, say to yourself, freeze. Now it's real hard to freeze at the handle if the model's pointed down a little bit. But even if it's pointed up, freeze that corner. I would say it's better to have this angle up a little bit than to have it come out and then do that and then go up. I would say this will buy you a better score. My opinion, again. Remember, everything in this is my opinion. There's no doubt that Dave Cook, Bill Zimmer, any of the people that have judged for a long time, Lee Laura, they all have their pet little things they look for. This is things I've found that have helped me be in the top 5 on a pretty regular basis. I think this information will help you a whole lot. And if a person that's a professional judge or judges a lot of meets sees this differently, well, that's okay too. This is just my opinion. Keep that in mind. And it's meant to try to help you upgrade your scores, upgrade your way of looking at the stunt event, give you a little handle on what the judges usually buy, what they look for, what they award maximum points for. Next maneuver, horizontal 8. What's some of the obvious things to look for? The intersection. What I try to do is if I'm flying at a field where there's a light pole or something I can pick up in the background, I can usually pick that up. And obviously, a way that Gene Schaefer used to describe this would be this maneuver should look like 2/4. And you'll notice that if there's 2/4, the ship never flies up. Once you do this, you have a distorted maneuver. At no point in time should the plane be flying straight up. It should transition smoothly, a smooth transition. The opposite problem would be an Xing. It's called Xing, is when you fly this and never get the ship vertical. This is not a correct way of doing a maneuver either. Is the ship at a split second in time should be vertical, then transition. A split second and transition. Obviously, you'd like to see both loops the same size and the same height. If a ship, now this is a critical point of trim, a critical point. If a ship speeds up here and doesn't speed up here, and you hear the motor braking here, not braking here, it's probably a tank shim. And a lot of people fly all their life and never get the motor to brake evenly. This is a good maneuver to test that your tank is shimmed correctly. If the motor is braking here, as soon as you point the nose up, it brakes here, and it flies this whole part of the maneuver without braking, well, obviously you have to shim the tank, and that's a whole other topic of discussion. I don't want to get into that right now, but unequal power is a tank shim almost every time. If a plane, even though the engine is braking equally, and it's getting soft here and not on the other side, one side and not the other, it's probably going to be a trim tab or a flap tweak. Flap tweak and a trim tab, the same exact thing. So looking at the horizontal 8, you want to find out, are we equal? Is it going soft? If it goes soft, we want to make the adjustment. These are all basic things that are going to go into the trim. And it's basic. The hardest thing to do probably for anybody is to identify what the problem is. A lot of times if you have a resident expert at your field, and it won't be important whether it's Ted Fancher, Whiteley, whoever, Barron, get a top-level flyer to fly your airplane. Let one of them give you an idea of what might be a typical cure for that problem. Because almost, I would say without question, anybody that makes it to the top 10 at the Nationals knows how to trim airplanes and would have important information that you could take advantage of. Usually, if you just ask, you'll get it. It's one ask away, and they would take it as an ego trip, a compliment, whatever. I've never found anybody that's an expert level flyer that would refuse to help anybody. And if they do, call me up and let me know, and we'll jump on their case. But most people are really helpful, and anybody that's in the circle burn is just more than helpful on these kind of things. An expert can identify this, help you with the cure, and probably at the end of the day you'll be light years ahead of where you were before. Okay, square 8. Again, inside, outside, of course we repeat the whole pattern, and exit. Okay, what would be some typical problems? The biggest thing probably all judges look for is the intersection. You'd like to have the intersection equal. You'd like to have the length equal. You'd like to have the height equal to the length. All obvious things. But in this particular maneuver, what you don't want to do is something that looks like this. And come by, and you can look for a split second if that aircraft is not pointing straight up. You want it to be straight up. That's what's going to buy you. When you can hit that intersection and fly straight up, that's going to buy you expert level maximum points every time. Again, this bottom, ultra critical. This bottom, ultra critical. Bottoms win nationals, regardless of what the geometry is. Usually it's the fellow with the best bottoms that's going to win the nationals every time. That just not a point that I would even discuss with anybody. If you have an opinion that geometry wins, that's fine. My opinion is you do good bottoms, everything else can be not 100%, but you had better have good bottoms, and they had better be dead flat. That ship better come out and fly dead flat, and you'll have a good shot at winning. You come out and give them one of those, I don't care how good the geometry is, not going to buy you maximum points. This maneuver right here, and I want to go over this with a red pen, here's where a Rabe rudder starts to come into effect. Right here, when a Rabe rudder is adjusted properly, this part of the maneuver will have outstanding line tension. The Rabe rudder will be working for this whole segment of the maneuver in your favor. It'll make line tension out here outstanding. Rabe rudder. That's going to be your best trim device. A lot of times, again, you're looking for equal speed, equal brake, equal power, equal feel at the top of the maneuvers. If it's not equal, you want to make the adjustment, and it'll probably be a flap tweak or whatever. If a ship goes soft in this intersection, for whatever reason, one of the most classic ways of getting around it is more motor offset. I've taken ships that absolutely would not climb this corner and go around here. They were terrible and tried every conceivable tip weight option, line rake. The only thing that seems to help in that part of the pattern and help with every plane every time is more motor offset to get it through that part of the pattern. Almost every ship will be weak in that area because of the GP of the motor. And more motor offset will usually always work right there. Okay, vertical 8. From this point up, when a ship is weak up here, when it goes here and then it wants to free fly it and go crazy on you, then come down, it's good down here, and then it goes crazy up here. Power. You want more power, more prop diameter, more motor brake. Typical things, more tip weight, more line rake. I guess this pretty much covers all the things that would help this be nice and tight up here. When a ship constantly wants to do this, it gets to this point and then it wants to come down to a point where you can't pull it out and it has to go up like that. This usually should mean you should take a little nose weight out or use a little bit bigger handle to get this to hold the tuck under, to get the tuck under correct. Again, vertical 8 is a difficult maneuver. It's a power maneuver. It requires a plane to be in relatively good trim to get this nice and smooth, equal to the bottom, come around smooth. And then, of course, most important part of the whole maneuver, in my opinion, nice flat bottom, not to come out of it and give it one of those. Maximum points, not maximum points. Equal size loops. Right about here, the motor should break into a 2-cycle, go around. Right about here, it should kind of shut off into a 4-cycle, come around, transition to a 2-cycle. If it transitions into a 2-cycle up here, your venturi is probably too small. You could go with a little bit bigger venturi to get it to break quicker. At the same time you make the venturi bigger, put a head shim under the head so that the compression is a little lower. Bigger venturi will usually up the compression, and we'll try to get into that in one of the other tapes when we talk about setting up motors. Anyway, we like it to break right about here, right about at 9 o'clock to break, give us that nice smooth power and then shut right off. If it doesn't shut off, if it continues running fast all through the bottom, you probably have a cooling problem or a vibration problem, one or the other. And we'll speak about that definitely a little bit later on in the video. All right, we want to talk about the hourglass. Come in, just like a triangle. You're probably wondering where the triangle went. I wanted to save the triangle for this maneuver because it's kind of redundant to just repeat it over and over. And why we haven't talked about the takeoff, because I want to talk about takeoff and landing at the same time. Notice that there is a triangle in this maneuver. And this is an important concept. If you remember that this is a triangle, you will probably hit this angle. You will be practicing this maneuver at the same time, and you'll get a consistent triangle. When you can do consistent triangles, you can just freeze the handle here, and you'll have, this would be the top of a wingover, and you'll have consistent hourglasses. These two maneuvers should be discussed at the same time. If you tend to do this in triangles, you're probably going to have a real lousy, distorted hourglass. The easiest way to practice the hourglass is get good triangles first. Get the triangles wired, then go on to the hourglass. When a ship is soft up at the top here, same trim applies that we mentioned on the previous maneuver. Power, diameter, more brake, more tip weight, more line rake. All of the above, some of the above, a lot of the above. Get it solid up here. Usually tip weight will be the thing that'll make it real solid up here. You want to try to hit nice corners. Bob Barron used to tell me when we were discussing trim that he hits the plane up here very soft. Don't pull back on the handle. Don't shake the handle. try to just cushion this maneuver. Plane is at its lightest line tension up here. Just touch it and it'll come around. Another trick, Bobby Hunt is excellent at doing this with the tuned pipe ships, is just before you go into this maneuver, use the lap before it to whip into it. Whip it like it's a speed model. Hit this corner. Let that additional power, stored energy, get you up this leg. If a ship is weak up here and it's kind of fluttering, it usually means it has weak power. You can take advantage of that. Okay, another trick. Real good trick. These are pro tricks. Here's the circle. Here's the relative wind. You would normally want to do your hourglass right here. Go out to the field, do a bunch of hourglasses, and find out you are having trouble doing them there. And there's always a good trick. And the trick is to move the hourglass over here. Just a little bit. Don't bias it off down here. Move the hourglass this way, because watch what happens. Right here, where the plane is the weakest, making that climb, especially if you have weak power, and it needs to be whipped, or you want to whip it just for insurance purposes, right here the wind is going to push the plane away from you. It's going to help you a whole lot. Bias it this way. Never bias it this way. Bias it this way and you're going to eat that airplane. That plane is going on a ride. Bias it this way a little bit. It'll definitely be a good trick you can use. You also can use this with the vertical 8 if you have a weak power package. That's a good way to get through it. The good old overhead 8 would be easiest to do if we drew a circle. And we enter here, fly up, inside, outside, and down and exit. Let's assume the wind is blowing this way. What's going to typically happen is radius in this entry. The entry and exit is not judged on this maneuver, by the way. Radius this. This doesn't bleed off airspeed, so it means you get a nice little rolling start to get into the wind. This would be a typical mistake, would be Xing. This is going to cost you in points. You always want the ship to be dead downwind for a split second. Dead downwind, dead downwind, dead downwind. Now what that allows the ship to do, as the ship weather vanes through here, the wind gives it a little push, gives it a little speed going downwind, gives it a little push. This way the ship is struggling, and the wind is whipping the tail around, and you've got all kind of crazy contortions. Get that ship to point. And that's a good way to take advantage of that maneuver. Obviously, you would like to be at 45 degrees. Some ships can't do that for whatever reason. And if you're getting slack in one side or the other, when it's always slack in one side and not the other, it's usually a wing that's crooked. When it's slack in both sides, when you have a ship that's slack only in one side, it's a wing, out of trim. When it's slack here and here, it means you're probably weak on power. And all the things we discussed, more diameter, more power, more tip weight, more line rate, will all apply here. However, the best one, and we wanted to save this probably toward the end, because this is about where you'll wonder, if all of those things you take advantage of and you still don't get a nice overhead 8, shorten the lines. Bob Barron used to do that right at the Nats. If he'd have trouble getting through a maneuver, go cut 2 feet off the lines, it'll go right through. Same thing applies to the other maneuvers. If we talk about the other maneuvers, let's say this maneuver here we have a problem with. Hey, shortening the lines will help the top. Vertical 8, we can't get through the top. Shortening the lines will help. Might even help on that one. Maybe will not help that much. Obviously, there's a point at which you can't shorten the lines anymore. And then, when you reach the point that you can't shorten the lines anymore, the plane is getting too close and the plane looks too big in the pattern, you have to try alternative methods. But shortening the lines will almost always help. 4-leaf clover. Typical mistakes that are easy to identify. You fly in here, right about here the plane wants to free flight on you. Okay, you come around here, goes around nice. Right here it goes over here and it starts free flighting again. I'll come around. when you have these free, I call them free flight tendencies here, go back through the video, all the things we described. Tip weight, line rake, more diameter, more power, more motor brake. This is an important concept. If the motor is running one speed through this whole maneuver, you're screwed. You're going to have trouble. It'll either be going too fast here or too slow here. We're going to get into that right at the end of this pattern discussion. All the things that would generate more power, shorter lines, this would be applicable to this maneuver. Typical mistakes, big mistakes, advanced level flyer mistakes, and they never know why they don't get top score. They come into this maneuver, come around here. As soon as they come out, they transition back. This, I'd say, is the biggest mistake. Don't cut off the first loop. When you make the first loop, say, fly, fly, go down, fly, 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 fly. In the middle of this maneuver is an X of flats. This maneuver is not 4 circles. If you look at 4 circles, you'd see there's an X in between. Fly the flats. Very important. Fly the flats. Fly the flats for maximum points. Now, my favorite point of discussion. The reason this is a favorite point of discussion is if you've ever been to a Nats or a big contest, you'll be well aware of the fact that expert level flyers usually get 36s and 38s on takeoff and landing. Advanced level flyers don't generate those points, and there's a very simple reason why. Divide the circle into 4 pieces in your mind. Now, wherever you decide to take off, wherever that point of takeoff is, okay, and we don't know exactly right now where it is. Let's say we're going to take off here. Ship rolls 15 feet, it's airborne. By the time it reaches here, it should be 1 foot high, 2 feet high, 3 feet high. Back where it was, 4 feet, or whatever you decide your level flight is going to be. Biggest mistake is jump off the ground, go to 4 feet, and fly level, and then complain to the judges that you flew perfectly level. That's not what they're looking for. They want to see a takeoff roll and a smooth transition to 4 feet within 1 lap. That's what gets you 38, 39, whatever, whatever, whatever. You don't jump up, bingo. Okay, by the same token, landing. When you're landing, everybody comes in for a landing, the motor shuts off at some point, and they glide, 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 glide. They're whipping and whipping and whipping and gliding and whipping and whipping. And they don't understand why they're not. That plane is gliding and it's going up and down and up and down, up and down. A good landing is when the airplane shuts off the motor and the plane never goes up. It comes down in a smooth transition, flares a little, touches down and doesn't bounce, rolls smoothly. It never, remember this saying, never goes up. It can go down at any rate you want it to go, but it never goes up. That'll probably get you maximum landing scores. Never goes up. That's a good concept to learn. This will generate maximum points. Now, having gone through the whole pattern once, I want to make a few other suggestions, and these are intangible things that don't appear on the scoreboard. Intangible. Who knows how to spell it? In keeping with the tradition, I'll spell it wrong and see who knows the right way to spell it. What's the intangible things now? The appearance points. And if you don't have top appearance points, well, hell, let's get out some of those finishing articles. Get out some truck magazines and look at truck paint jobs, something quick, something cute. Custom boat magazines have nice paint jobs. Getting maximum appearance points. A lot of people think they're just going to show up with a monocoque airplane. Hell, at this year's Nationals, we figured out if Bob Barron, who had 14 appearance points, had 19, he'd have been third at the Nats. Something ridiculous. And whoever was fifth would not be fifth. They would be out. Appearance points are a critical thing. You can't just ignore them. Your appearance. Now, I can just hear a bunch of people screaming right now, white pants, oh, I don't like, Well, whatever it is, If you don't like white pants, how about a nice clean pair of dungarees? When you look at Jimmy Casale, you look at Billy Warwood, you look at Ted Fancher, neat appearance. Neat is the key here. If you want to go overboard and be a windy with red pants and Hawaiian shirts like Bob Whiteley wears and Rabe, whatever your thing is, but neat. The key is not to look like you're on welfare. Not to look like you, just came out of a coal mine. I think it'll buy you something. It's my opinion. Judges will say no, they don't look at the pilot. I don't believe that. I believe a neat appearance is an asset, and especially if you're a little bit overweight. I can name a few people that are a little bit overweight and they don't dress to full advantage and the crack of their ass is always sticking out or their two socks are different colors. It doesn't add anything to your score. It's an intangible thing. It lets you look professional and be treated like a professional. I think everybody should take advantage of it. Everybody. Another thing, having a nice aeroplane. And I don't mean a maximum appearance points plane. Just having one that appears businesslike, clean, neat, doesn't look ridiculous, isn't too oddball looking. Having a traditional, neat aeroplane is going to be an asset. If you decide you're going to show up at the Nats with a twin boom something with 7 landing gear or 4 canopies, you're probably going to be downscored for it. A nice ship, and I always put in small words, traditional. The more traditional you can make the ship, I think it buys you something. Having an oddball looking ship that looks like it belongs in some other event, I don't think it buys you anything. You might have a counterpoint to that, you want the unusual points, but if you have a ship that basically looks like a Nobler, a T-Bird, a Juno, a Genesis, a Pattern Master, traditional looking airplanes, these are going to get you the most bang for your buck. If you do wind up with something unusual and it sets the trend, great. But a lot of times you can lose it. This is just an example of what I feel is a traditional paint job, traditional looking airplane, and probably an asset to the person who's building it and flying it. Most people would look at this and agree that this is a stunt ship, it belongs on a stunt circle, and they take this person relatively seriously. So that can be an asset. This is Richie Tower's F-105, a rather non-traditional looking airplane from the era of semi-scale jets. I think this is a Bob Hunt design, I'm not sure. Painted up like the Thunderbirds. But one of the things Richie did is he took advantage of the fact that most people in that day and age were excited by jet-looking stunners. So he made the plane match the day, and it worked well for him. He was very successful with this airplane. Now you notice this is Jack Horowitz's plane. It's from the Jimmy Casale's plans. How he's adapted this, and this is a traditional looking ship. He's adapted his own paint job into this relatively jet looking airplane, and he's been successful with it. Another copy of a ship that is a relative jet looking ship that can be made effective to work. The thing you have to be careful with when you try to do radical designs is try not to make them too radical. If you made this same plane a twin boom with 4 wheel pants and maybe 6 rudders, it would start to look hokey. You want to just keep it conservative a little bit, and you'll be real effective. These are all nice planes. I think they'd all score top appearance points. This was a ship that I patterned after the Red Baron, kind of a takeoff on the Red Baron, a fantasy Mustang, with a side-mounted engine and a Griffin wing. Kind of a Reno Air Racer look. And I think most people really did like the look of this airplane. It would be real easy in this case to make it look hokey though, and you have to walk that fine line. And I feel that's a very important part of upgrading your performance, is getting the right look in the airplane. And once you find it, don't go crazy trying to change it. Now this part of the discussion leads to a really important concept, and the concept is to take each airplane that you build and improve the next one. Take the things that are wrong with it and upgrade the next one. Take the things that are wrong with that one and upgrade the next one. So that at some point in time, you've got the final product. You've got something that's a thoroughbred. If you start at ground zero with each plane and you don't get the nose moment right and the tail moment, you don't know the tip weight numbers, you don't know the line rake, what happens here is I build one plane and I have all the numbers. And when I build this plane, I transpose all the numbers into this one. Then and I'm just using these for examples. Then when I build the third one, I have all the numbers from the first two cataloged in a book. Well, this one has to be a thoroughbred. You don't wind up going to the field and not knowing what length the lines are, how much to shim the tank, what size prop to use. Develop a thoroughbred. It's an important concept, and it's worked well for me. It's worked well for Jim Greenaway, who designed all these airplanes. That thoroughbred concept will always buy you something. It's free lunch. Thoroughbred. Take each one, write down what's wrong with it, what part happened, and a typical thing would be, gee, on the first one, it needed a lot of nose weight, so the second one will make the nose a little longer. First one came out too heavy, let's make the paint job on the second one a little thinner. On and on and on, 1,000 little ways. The first one had the stab too high in the fuselage, it didn't turn insides well, lower the stab 1/8 of an inch. You can make constant little adjustments to the vertical CG, to the overall trim of the plane, right on the drawing board. Improve each one. That's a good concept for trimming aeroplanes. Now here's a big concept. These are concept things that I just can't emphasize enough. Nose construction. This is a picture of somebody that's building a Gid Atkinson design, the big laser. Nose construction. You want the motor to be mounted rigidly. A rigid mounted motor, solid, stable, is going to be your best defense on getting good motor runs. You can't have the nose of the plane shaking like a dog shaking his tail and expect to get quality motor runs, good quality motor runs. It's hard enough to do it when you have a profile. It's difficult to do it because the nose is always shaking. The piston is going up and down and it's making the nose a washboard. It's always good to have a cheek cowl to take up some of the vibration. If you make plywood doublers, extend them to the flap hinge line. Keep the nose rigid. Nose construction. In trimming an airplane, what really happens is when you have a weak nose, you wind up trimming the plane because you'll never get an effective motor run. You'll always be going crazy with the motor run. These scoops, like on Richie Towers' F-105 and Jimmy's Spectron, these scoops help absorb vibration. On my F-16, they were tremendous in absorbing vibration. Again, this variant will help absorb vibration. Gid Atkinson's plane has a lot of meat and beef in the nose. It's going to help. It's going to be a tremendous asset. Now, to tell you a long story, this is Bill Rich's plane. I don't think he'll mind me telling a story. A few years back, he built a ship. He did not put the correct plywood in the nose, and that ship would not trim out worth a damn. I was in Florida. I did some flying with him. We tried to trim the ship out. No amount of trim would compensate for the fact that the motor wouldn't run right. We eventually gutted the whole nose section, pulled the tank out, the motor, dremeled the whole inside out, and put plywood doublers in it, even though they didn't go back to the flap hinge line. After the plane was built, we put in 16th plywood. Went out to the field, it was a brand new airplane. Trimmed out fine, needed less tip weight, less diameter, could fly on longer lines. A million other good things happened. Take advantage of people's technology. All of the big people that have ever run successfully have always had solid nose construction. Jimmy's real Columbia, Spectron, whatever he calls this, with those big scoops, big advantage, it helps absorb the vibration. Excellent. Everybody in the world, I'm sure, from myself to Bob Barron to everybody, has built ships that don't have the correct plywood in the nose. I know Bob has. Say hello, Bob. We've all done it. We've all tried to build planes with chintzy nose sections. The motors don't run worth a shit. In fact, in one person's experience, the vibration was so bad that it broke the cable on the handle. So you really want to pay strict attention when a person designs a plane. Get the proper plywood, the proper construction in the nose. Maybe trade away a little bit of weight, but you want that nose construction. Now, Having the proper nose construction is one part of getting the motor to run properly. Nose construction. Second part, I have always found whatever size tank you use, the height of the tank to be no more than 1 inch. When you use larger tanks, you don't get the proper motor run. And this can go anywhere up from 1 inch to 1.5 inches. There's all kinds of other options. There's plastic gas tanks that have been made to work by Bob Barron, various other people. I think Billy Werwood uses plastic tanks. They have a clunk in them. This works off a whole different principle. For right now, we're not going to discuss this principle, and if you're interested in that principle, I'd suggest you call Bob Hunt up, because he seems to make that work real well. I have not had luck making these work. I have had the best luck, from my experience, using 1-inch tanks similar to the ones Doug Taffender sells. Getting the motor to run right. A lot of things are involved here. Maximum tank. I've also had good experience mounting the tank directly in the middle of the airplane. When it's off to this side, or if it's crooked this way or this way, several crazy things happen. It would be a 2-hour tape just describing the downside of not having the tank in the middle. It should be fair to mention that Brian Ether, though, and this is Alan Ressinger's plane, has a completely different tank shape, and it works well for him. These tanks work well for Bob Hunt, Billy Werwood, Bob Barron. For my purposes, I've had this prove to be the best tank. Again, it's a typical Doug Taffender type tank. I always run, and we'll make a drawing of the top of the tank, I run the tank vents all out the front of the ship, and then connect one to the engine, connect the Uniflow if I'm using Uniflow, with a piece of tubing. I put the vent in the body, okay, and then I connect this with a piece of tubing. That's the method I use, and the same with the overflow. I let that go out the bottom of the plane. I never suggest or having the tanks permanently mounted. Les McDonald used to do that, various other people. It's prone to vibration cracks right here, especially when using a 60. If you use a Schnurley engine, maybe you don't get as much vibration, but a 60 almost always will crack this way. You have to be real careful about how you do it. If you're careful, you might get it to work. You might be real lucky. But I know if you do it this way, it'll work every single time. So that's just concepts that are important to understand about getting a motor to run right. Nose construction. Isolate the tank vents. As a last resort, as an absolute last resort on nose construction, get the tank shimmed properly and take 2 or 3 ounces of epoxy and pour it around the tank. Glue the tank in as a permanent structure. Dennis Adamson does this to all his planes. In the old days, Nobler's tanks were glued in. The tank then becomes part of the structure. It can help with vibration. An important concept. The tank can become part of the vibration absorbing medium of the airplane. That works well for a lot of people. Now, what I'd like to do now is, while we're talking about tanks and while we all have fuel tanks in our mind, we can mention Uniflow. Okay, we can run suction. Okay, and we can run muffler pressure. Now, a lot of different variations of these come into play. One of the things you'd like to know when trimming a plane is what direction you want to go in. If the motor is braking from the beginning of the flight to the end of the flight, I like to have the ship change, because the maneuvers in the beginning of the pattern are very, very easy maneuvers, slow maneuvers, the round loops, the wingover. You can get by with a little bit of a rich run. Toward the end of the pattern, I want the motor to speed up. Around the vertical 8, hourglass, I'd like to have that motor kick in. The system that'll do that the best, the most variation you'll have, is with suction. Straight suction, meaning no uniflow, no muffler pressure, you will have the maximum amount of, absolute maximum amount of change from the beginning of the flight to the end of the flight. Uniflow will be a little more stable. the variation. In this case, it might be 3/10 from the beginning. It would start off at 5.3, end at 5.0. Uniflow might start at 5.3, end at 5.2. This might be a variation of 2, and I'm just making up numbers. Muffler pressure, whether you run it on Uniflow or suction, you can run muffler pressure on suction, muffler pressure on Uniflow. This will give you the most stable run. Now here's an important concept. If you have a plane that has a vibration problem, what system would you want to use? Well, hell, you'd want muffler pressure. It helps cure vibration. It stabilizes the motor run. If you had a plane that had a nice solid nose section, you probably could get away with this. Or if you used a Schnurley motor that had a very low level of vibration, you could get away with that. Uniflow, there would be some upsides and downsides. Uniflow, one of the problems is as you go into the wind, it slows down, the exact opposite of what you want. As you go downwind, the motor speeds up because of the pressure on the Uniflow vent. So you have to decide whether you want that option or not. Do you want it to slow down going into the wind? Is the plane light enough and trimmed well enough that you can take advantage of that? If you have a vibration problem, I'd always suggest running muffler pressure and Uniflow. Muffler pressure and Uniflow will give you the best, most steady motor run. It will not change a whole lot from the beginning to the end of the flight. There's an advantage there. Okay. The disadvantage of muffler pressure is you lose brake. You lose some of the motor brake. Somewhat. When you lose some of the motor brake, then you get into the problem of the top of the round loops get soft, top of the vertical 8 and hourglass gets soft, the back end of the pattern gets soft. When the back end of the pattern is soft, get rid of muffler pressure. Get into suction or get into straight Uniflow. What I'm trying to say is you have a lot of options and you should tailor it to suit the ship. It's a trim feature. It's like a trim tab. It's like any other trim feature. You want to wind up with what's suitable for the airplane that you're flying. What's going to give you the best results for that airplane under the conditions you fly under. And this obviously takes some thought. You have to think about what the options are. The best of all worlds is to try all three. Then make a decision. And don't try it one flight. Try a whole day flying Uniflow. A whole day flying suction. A whole day with muffler pressure. A whole day with muffler pressure on Uniflow. Make notes of what got better, what got worse. Try them. Come back and make a decision which is best for that particular airplane. Now, in some cases, an example is I've always liked to use suction. I use suction on heavy airplanes because I want that brake. I want the most brake I possibly can get on a heavy plane. I need that power at the end of the flight. Suction, straight suction is a way to get that. On light airplanes, a nice light plane with a thin wing, muffler pressure. These are just directions to go in. Uniflow. You'd have to try both ways. The disadvantage of Uniflow is always going to be that going upwind, the plane is going to get rich. Going downwind, it's going to speed up. It's going to give you not a violent brake from the beginning to the end of the flight. However, you should always try it. See how you like it. Give it a try. Playing with tanks is a science all to itself. I just want to lay out some basic thoughts, some basic ideas. If you don't try them all, you're never really going to know. Give them all a try. This is a model that was built by Jim Lynch. I have it in my file. One of the things worth mentioning when we're trimming airplanes is this model obviously had a Rabe rudder. This is an Al Rabe designed Bearcat with a Rabe rudder. It also had a suction tank. And because the model had such a large wetted area, it needed a lot of power, Al Rabe was a big proponent of running straight suction and Rabe rudders. There's two trim features in this plane that allowed it to fly a whole lot better than had it been trimmed in a traditional method like a Nobler with a Uniflow tank and maybe a standard rudder. Al's planes tended to be very complex and hard to trim. And I would assume that he was maybe the master of trim for ships that were a little bit heavy, had small wings, were very draggy. And he always was in favor of using Rabe rudders and power packages that had a big change from the beginning to the end of the flight. Well, we're trying to cover all the bases. This is Billy Werwich's ship. I believe this was taken in the Washington Nationals where Bill got second. Bill is using a plastic tank and had a lot of good luck running tune pipes on plastic tanks. So be aware, there's not only one approach to this, there's not only one answer, but certainly if you tried them all, you could make a logical decision. What I hope this video helps you do is decide what options you want to try and do it in a methodical way that you can get the most bang for your buck when you're done with your day of experimenting. Next thing I'd like to mention on this, because I get a lot of questions from a lot of people on this. What's a typical line length for a 35 size ship? A 40 ship? A 46 ship? Maybe a 40 and a 46 pipe ship, Schnurly pipe ship, and a 60 ship. What would be typical line lengths to consider? It seems like there's an awful lot of people that fly 35 ships on 58 to 62 feet line length. Okay, 58 to 62 feet averaging out at 60. My guess is if you have a profile, small light plane under 40 ounces, I'd be willing to bet 58 will be the magic number. If you have kind of a heavy, bulky ship, maybe a powerful 35, a Schnurly 35, whatever, you might want to try 62s. 015 braideds are always my first choice. I don't like 12 solids. 015 braideds, that would cover that base. 40s can still fly on 015s, even though it seems like a ridiculous rule because most 40s make a lot of power and they will power heavy ships. Seems like a ridiculous rule, but somehow the AMA hasn't kept up with the times. Anyway, you can take advantage of 015 braideds. I would be willing to bet 62 feet would be the minimum, and you might want to go out to 65. Some people like Bob Hunt, and I'm sure Bobby's not the only one, just using him for an example, and Bob Barron have flown 40 ships on even longer lines. But for the average person, this is going to be a good starting point. A 46 ship, if we're talking about a Super Tiger 46, my guess is you would treat that the same way you treat a 40, except you have to use 018 lines or 014 braideds, 014 solids. Now, here's where my expertise can be a big help, my little advice. My advice is if you have a Tiger, Super Tiger 46 powered ship, you should never fly on anything but 014s. And the reason is this. The 018s are draggy. They're really terrible. You'll always wind up on solids with 2 or 3 feet longer lines, less drag, lead outs further forward. A lot of good trim changes will happen with 014 solids. And an ST46 really makes less power than a lot of Schnurly 40s. So you have a quirk in the rule here, whereby a 46 Tiger probably makes a little more power than a 35, but you're handicapped by that 018 rule. So take advantage of the fact that you're allowed to fly 014 solids. Get used to dealing with them. I would then take this group of engines, 40, 46 pipe engines, and 60s, and even include my system, which is a 60 pipe, and say all of these together should be from 67 feet to max. And they should always be, to take advantage of the rules, 014 solids. I don't like using 018s for anything. Unless you fly over grass and you're very clumsy and sloppy and you're constantly stepping on things and breaking things. If you're any kind of a workman, any kind of a neat person, get used to using solids. The trim advantages, and that's what this video is about, are absolutely astronomical over braided lines. Maximum lines. How do we measure lines? I know this is going to come up. I want to answer the question. Here's the center of the airplane, the tail, the propeller, that's right, and the center of the handle. Even though we'll do this as if we were Gene Schaefer flying left-handed. Here's the lines. How do we measure this? You measure from the center of the handle to the center of the airplane. Max 70 feet. I like to go about 69 feet, 6 inches maximum, because what happens, with time the lines stretch a little bit, And maybe when you get to the Nats or another big contest, they don't have it marked off equally or properly, and you might be off by an inch. And I've seen the person in charge ask the person to cut 2 inches off his lines, which I thought was ridiculous, but it's the rules. And we're supposed to be sportsmen. We're supposed to live within the rules. For that extra 6 inches, I wouldn't take a chance that I might be over, or that you would change the handle and the cable, and the handle might be 3 inches longer, and now you're over. So why fool around? 69 feet 6 inches, 014 solids. Take advantage of the rules. Why fool around? We'll spend a few minutes talking about basics and props. This is Mike Pratt's Magnum. Notice he's using a 3-blade carbon prop. Bob Whiteley's Bel Air, using a 2-blade wooden prop. A Magnum using a 2-blade carbon prop. Bill Suarez using a 3-blade Brian Ether prop. One of my ships when it had a 2-bladed prop on. The point here is a lot of different props work under a lot of different conditions, and I just want to lay out some basic information. 2-blade, in my experience dealing with all motors, 2 blades will always give the most power. If requirement number 1 is that the ship is heavy, bulky, draggy, probably going to wind up with a 2-bladed prop. A 3-bladed prop, you're always going to have soft power, relatively soft power, because of the lack of diameter, but it'll be predictable power. It'll be smooth, predictable power. A 3-blade will always be the quietest. Typically 3 to 5 decibels on a decibel meter, and I've measured it with many motors. A 3-blade is always the quietest prop, if that's a consideration. A 3-blade will have a little bit less pull, less total pull. Okay, and because it has the least amount of diameter, less diameter, plane will probably corner harder. If you're looking for more corner, a 3-blade prop is probably going to be what you want. A 2-blade prop if you're looking for more power. A 4-blade is going to be loud. Number one downside of a 4-blade, it's going to be loud. It's going to have the least amount of power. Those are 2 downsides of it. However, there will be pluses. Ground clearance. And absolutely max corner. Because the diameter, the reason you have the maximum corner, anytime you kill diameter, you're going to get more corner. So obviously up here you have the most diameter, most power, least corner. Somewhere in the middle you have a quiet system with soft power, predictable power. It'll corner a little harder than the 2, not as hard as the 4. The reason it corners more is because of diameter. The diameter that you choose to put on the front of your ship is going to, in a great way, determine the corner. More diameter, less corner. Less diameter, more corner. Every time. You take a typical plane that has a 13.6 rev up and put on a 12-inch Brian Ether prop, 3-blade. Put that on, it's going to have a violently more corner. Then go put on a 10.6 4-blade. The corner is going to be astronomical, probably uncontrollable. So you want to balance it against your needs for corner. Once you get the CG correct, which I described in tape 1, look at what the options are here. Now, real important concept while we're talking about propellers. I don't want to overlook this for 1 second. I want to make sure that I get this point across. A lot of people ask, what's the proper prop for a 35, a 40, a 46 Tiger, a 40, 46 pipe, or a 60, 60 pipe? What would be the proper props? My guess is first choice, Fox 35, Max 35, 10.6. Because of the low RPM range, the 6 pitch will work fine. A 40, a Schnurley, maybe a 10.5. Just a wild guess. An 11.5. Just rough numbers. 46 Tiger, the best prop I've ever seen is an 11.5 by 6 rev up. Never saw a better prop for a 46 Tiger. 40 and 46 pipes are generally going to be in the 11.5 by 4 range for pipe motors. 60, they're generally going to be in the 12 to 12.5 by 4 range. Just general numbers. A normal 60 without a pipe, 13.6 rev up, 12.5 zinger. Don't let the numbers fool you. 12.5 zinger has more pitch than this. Get used to reading pitch numbers. Pitch numbers can fool you. It can drive you crazy. And in case you've never seen one, this is a Prather pitch gauge. Instructions come with it. What I would suggest you do, obviously spend the $29. Get a Prather pitch gauge. It describes very carefully how to repitch props. I'm going to be doing a video in the future just about props, so I won't belabor this prop thing too much. The prop bolts on, you measure various stations and compare them. What you'll notice with wood props, every time you look at a wood prop, very seldom will both blades even be the same, let alone that they're both equal to another prop. So you should check every one, that's for sure. You should balance them. The carbon props, especially the ones that Brian Ether makes, are absolutely perfect. You don't even need a pitch gauge and you don't have to balance them. If you, another expert in prop technology, you should take advantage of his knowledge is Randy Smith. He sells props. I believe he sells Bowleys, and he might even have Brian Ethers. But an excellent man to speak to if you want to do some prop work. Take advantage of his technology. Randy Smith's phone number is 404-979-2035. A good man. Definitely a good man if you want to know about propellers. If you've thought about working on your own props, one of the things you'll want to know about, especially if you're dealing with wood props, is a thing called Phillips entry, for lack of a better word. I don't know what the real word is. I've called it Phillips entry. I've heard many other people, including Billy Werwood, say Phillips entry. Anyway, Phillips entry is basically this. Here's a prop blade. It has almost a Clark Y airfoil. A Phillips entry would be when you leave the pitch the same, but you remove this part of the wood. So that in effect, this prop now looks like that. This wood gets removed. Obviously, there's varying degrees of this. A concept you would want to know about for sure is that if this is a prop blade, let's just make a little prop blade, that it's this last inch of the prop, this last 1 inch, that does about 97% of the work. The rest of this blade, even though it's part of the effect, is really only responsible for about 3% of the overall thrust. So that if you Phillips entry the tip of a prop, it'll be most effective. If you Phillips entry the whole blade, it'll be a little more effective. But if you just take a prop and sand away at that tip, Phillips entry it, it'll usually be the equivalent of having more pitch. Like I said before, I don't want to spend the whole tape on props. I'm going to do a whole tape on props and try to put all the knowledge that I've gained into that video for general consumption. Thinning the entire blade, and I think Tom Dixon wrote a thing for Stunt News a while back. I don't have the Stunt Newses, but you could maybe write to Tom and he might have a copy of it, of thinning the whole blade out, the whole top surface of the blade, removing material to gain a little RPM. Obviously there's a point of no return. You can thin the blade lengthwise, and the best one I know that's done that is Al Rabe and Frank McMillan. You could drop Frank a line and find out exactly what him and Al were doing. I'm sure he'd be glad to help. Thinning the blade in this dimension and this dimension, Obviously, there's a point at which you can go too far, and then you're in trouble. I wouldn't stick my face down by props that are thinned way too thin. On the other hand, experimenting on an older plane would be the way to go, and fly a prop maybe 10 flights and examine it each time for cracks if you go ultra thin. Most important thing, keep the prop balanced at all times. Another concept with propellers. If this is the airfoil, and this is usually what, especially zingers, they're flat at the back and flat at the front. If you leave the pitch the same and razor blade this down, I call it making razor blades. Razor blade those edges, and then use a finger guard. This will probably add about 10% to the efficiency of the prop, making razor blades. Because that's biting through the air rather than, if you've ever been in a speedboat and you put your hand down in the water this way and then turn it sideways, see what happens, your hand will almost break off. That's what's happening, you're putting a big load on the engine. Other things to consider while we're talking about propellers, some of the things you want to consider. Putting too large of a prop on an engine is going to overload it. A typical way to detect that, you do a round loop, and up here, right up here, you're going to hear, oh, sag. When that usually will mean you have too much propeller on the plane, you need less diameter, less pitch, or both. Sagging. Loss of motor run. When you lose your motor run, one of the ways to lose it is to put too big of a prop. A typical thing that I've seen done is you put on a 40, put a 13.6 and see what happens. Well, 46, put a 12.6. It'll probably sag all the time. Even though it'll turn the prop, even though it'll run, you'll be putting a tremendous load on the motor. When the diameter gets too small, when the diameter is too small, take a wild guess what the first thing is going to happen is. Top of the vertical 8 will be soft. Top of the hourglass is going to disappear. It's going to go like that. Your square 8 is going to be here. It's going to go free flighting away on you. 4-leaf clover, it's going to be weak here, here. You're probably going to need more diameter. So, again, a balancing act like anything else. You can try carbon props, you can try wood props. My guess is, let's pretend, I guess the most popular engine is still a Super Tiger 60 and a 46. On a 46, try that 11.5 by 6 prop. That's the best bet. I've never seen one better. If your engine is weak, it doesn't want to turn it, cut it down to 11.25. If you have a Super Tiger 60, I would definitely say get some 13.6 rev-ups, cut them to 12.5. Have a few 12.5 zingers, and also have a few carbon props. And I would recommend either Brian Ether's props or Bowley props that Randy has repitched. Bowley props typically have way too much pitch. It's a good idea if you like to try Bowleys, get Randy to repitch them for you. And get a power package that matches the prop. Again, if you try everything, you'll probably wind up the winner. Here's something you just can't avoid talking about when you talk about tricks the old-timers knew. Excuse me. Old-timer tricks. Bob Gildini for one, I remember. Harold Price for another one. Always big on slop in the controls. What you'd like to have, and we'll use a Pro Stun Products belt crank and horn assembly just for reference point. No slop at all. A tight link. Tight. More than likely an arrow shaft. Absolutely tight. No slop in this assembly at all. This bushing right here, and an arrow shaft. This would be a full-size control system. Right here we'd want to have, right here, a 1/8 hole, a 3/32 rod. That control system, this slop in here is going to allow the elevators a little bit of free play. You're going to have about an 1/8 inch of slop in that elevator, but you're going to have no slop between the flaps and the belt crank. If you've ever noticed, now Pro Stunt products, and I'll just mention this, there's other people that make horns, so don't let me sound like this is an advertisement, but if you use the mechanical ratios that I'm writing down on the paper here, if you use a 4-inch spacing and you use a 13/16 spacing here between these two, 13/16 from the bolt to the eyelet, and your max here from the horn is 110 thousandths, which is a little bit more than an inch, and this rod from here to here at 3/4 of an inch or 750. If you use that control system, I would be willing to guarantee that 99% of the time you will never have a control system problem. When you start reinventing this ratio and this ratio and that ratio, and you start making ratios up, you could wind up with a 6-inch handle, a 3-inch handle. You could wind up with the craziest of things happening. Stick with proven numbers. Stick with things that have been proven to work in hundreds and hundreds of airplanes. I've sold almost 600 control horns already. The ones I make that have 1/8-inch slop, you can ask for them either way, with an 1/8-inch hole or with no slop. Some people like to put their own slop in. If you use these proven components, you will never have a control system problem. If you reinvent something, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I would be inclined not to reinvent things, though. Here's our typical stunt ship. Let's talk about some trim problems that might come up in the course of flying the airplane. Okay, one of the ones that obviously, and if you've watched tape 1 you know how important it is to get the CG correct. Now, what happens if? Here's a what happens if. You run that line out to the wingtip, and you notice, if you take our calculator and take out your little piece of paper, you'll notice that roughly 80 to 85% of the airplane, depending on what the design is behind the center of gravity. A tremendous amount of that airplane is behind the center of gravity. So what would you suspect had happened? We have a last resort. This plane is already too heavy. It's 75 ounces. And it's tail heavy, which is usually the case. Okay, what's some of the things we can do to get this plane at least to be a flyable, usable airplane? Obviously, the first thing we can do is get out the old 400 sandpaper. Start with the bottom. Sand off all the clear off the bottom until you start to see white paint or whatever color the plane is coming off in the sandpaper. Do the bottom first. You'll probably be able to get a 1/2 to 3/4 of an ounce off the plane, which will allow you, if you get 3/4 of an ounce off the back of the plane, you're probably going to be able to get about 1.5 ounces out of the nose. Okay? So there's a relationship here to understand. The further back you can get weight off, if you can get weight off back here, well, it's about 2 times the amount you can get off up in the front. So if you get 3/4 off, 1.5 ounces, the total gain is about 2 1/4. Now the plane is like 72 ounces, maybe a little better than 72. Well, hell, it's going to fly better now every time. Every time it's going to fly better. If you have a super light plane, this isn't going to be as effective. But sanding the weight off rather than adding a big chunk of lead to the nose is definitely the way to do it. The technique of choice. Now the other thing I always say, now turn the plane over right side up, and when the airplane is right side up, start at the back. Get as much weight as you can off back here to the point where you're almost going through the paint. Then buff it, because the top you're going to want to have smooth. You maybe can get this every bit right up to about here. I mean, really get it thin. If you go through, just airbrush on a little touch-up. Back here, you probably can get a lot off. Up here, not too critical, because you're really going to need the weight on the outboard tip. Leave the outboard tip now. Well, hell, it doesn't pay to sand the outboard tip. Let the outboard tip have all the clear on it. Let the front of the wing have all the clear it wants. Let this have all the clear. Put on 25 coats of clear on the nose. You're going to need weight, but get it light back here. Get this light. Get the ass end super, super light. And you'll be way ahead of the game. Notice Billy Werwige's planes. Take a look at Billy Werwige's planes. for a lesson in how to keep the back light. There's a ship. I don't know if you're going to see it on the tape. All built up structure, built up rudder, Juno type flaps. I don't know if you even can see this on the video. The flaps are similar to a Juno. This is a real good example of how to keep, notice how long the tail is compared to the, good way to keep the back of the plane light. This was very effective, was a very good airplane. Again, that relationship is when you can get weight off the back, you can take double to triple the amount off the front. When you get weight off here, you can take about the same amount off. This weight in here, you'd like to get it all off the inboard wing. Leave the outboard tip, let it be heavy. And the bottom, let's be realistic. Whoever looked at the bottom of the planes? Even at the Nats, nobody looks at the bottom of the planes. So why put 4 ounces of paint on the bottom? Put enough that the plane is fuel-proof and leave it at that. Here's something I just like to mention. And if you're going to have a typical, let's make a fuselage side here. Let's pretend to tell you, and now let's make the motor mounts here. Keeping all these alignments, the alignment of the motor mount, the alignment of the wing and the fuselage, and the alignment of the tail, all correct. Keeping these all, so if the body wasn't there, 0, 0, 0, or on an inline plane that they were 1, 2, 3. Keeping everything parallel and in alignment, another important concept. You can't have the motor go off at a 10-degree angle, the tail crazy, the wing in crooked. If these things are not all 0, somewhere in the pattern, you're going to have a problem. Now, one of the ways that I maintain alignment is by building what's called a crutch. And you would build a crutch very simply. These are 2 motor crutches that I've built for customers. A big important part of trimming an airplane. This is a crutch. It has aluminum pads to mount the engine on. Blind nuts, they're covered with a piece of balsa, an 1/8 inch piece. There's 1/2 inch wood between 1/2 inch mounts. The grain goes sideways. It's all glued together with slow drying epoxy for maximum strength. This is basically the same one but to fit a different design airplane. And it doesn't have the piece because of the alignment. We want the crutch higher in the fuselage. It tapers back so it actually attaches right into the wing. Now, the way to build these, a way to build these crutches, and this is how you would start building a body. Okay? Try to draw a little sketch here and I hope it comes out okay, but a crutch is an important part of the airplane. What you're going to want to wind up with virtually every time you build, you're going to have the motor. In this case, these are both made for Super Tiger 60s. The motor. You're going to take the mounts and individually take the mount as step 1. These are 1/2 inch square mounts. Okay, I'm just going to walk through this real fast. You're going to glue on with CA aluminum pads. These are 1/8 inch aluminum. They're drilled and tapped and everything ready. You can buy them from me or you can make them yourself out of rock hard aluminum, 6061. Even better if you can get them anodized. That'll leave a nice coating on them. Okay, these get wood screwed in so that you now have a piece of aluminum. This is wood screwed in. You can see the wood screws holding it in. Now, this becomes your jig for lining up the 2 holes. You drill through these 2 holes, insert the blind nuts, put some glue on them, and what you have in effect is 2 individual motor mounts with aluminum pads on them with the holes drilled for a 60 or for whatever motor. So you're going to wind up with 2 of these guys with the pads already together. Okay. Now what you do is you put the engine in. You bolt the engine right in place. That engine is right in place. Tighten up all 4 of the blind nuts. Tighten them up real tight. Then measure the back and the front so it's dead equal. Now you know it's dead parallel. Now take 1/2 inch hard balsa wood, fill in 1 piece, slow epoxy, usually you need 4 pieces. Grain going sideways. Okay? Slow drying epoxy, put masking tape around it, rubber bands, whatever you need. The motor's bolted in place. Check the alignment that the back and the front are the same. Your motor's in position. Now what you've done is create what's known in the aircraft industry as a pre-stressed unit. This is pre-stressed. The motor is in position. So that when the bolts are loosened and you put them back in, you've already created the stress and the alignment. When you make a fuselage individually and then bolt the motor and it wants to go and twist this all up, and you run into an alignment problem. So by making a crutch as the first step of fuse construction, and it's relatively easy, it takes about 4 hours for me to make, sand, put the final coat. I even put the first tank shim on mine. I put a thin piece of balsa on one side because I never have the tanks go down lower than the mounts. And on some of them, and again this is another one I made for a customer, this is covered on the top because the engine is going to sit an 1/8 inch lower in the airplane, so we sheet over the top. This helps the alignment tremendously. Now when you go to install this in the airplane, you take the engine out and you have your fuse side and it's got the cutout, and you just check the alignment so that the wing is in carefully, and you glue this right in position. So from the front view, here's your two fuse sides and you already have the crutch. When you glue this in position, you've got this at a 90-degree perfect, this at a 90-degree perfect. This is dead parallel to the wing, assuming you're on a parallel table. You have created 2 of the 3 alignment factors in one stroke of the pen. Very easy to do. If you for some reason don't have a level table or you can't make this part, I would suggest choice 1. I will make these for people. I charge $39 to make these. They're in the catalog. And they come with the bolts, the aluminum pads, everything ready to go. Without this, you really run a high risk that you're not going to have correct alignment. You're going to have something crooked, something twisted, fuse sides on an angle wrong. If you've ever seen a fuselage built with this technique, it's so beautiful you wonder why nobody invented it sooner. This is Big Jim Greenaway's technology, and it's worked excellent for me. It's got me into that top 5 a lot more times than I deserve. And one of the things I want to talk about next, important concepts. About 1 out of 10 ships that I look at or fly for somebody or try to help trim out has a phenomenon known as inadequate cooling of the motor. Symptoms of inadequate cooling are you do consecutive maneuvers, each one gets a little faster than the next one, or when it comes down out of a maneuver, the motor doesn't go back to running in a 4-cycle instantly. Now, inadequate cooling is probably the most common thing. This is a picture, and the reason I'm using this for an example of, this is a ship that Rick Fetters built from Des Moines, Iowa, and you can see the cooling holes he's used on it right off the Cardinal plan. It's a Cardinal design. And this was an excellent way that I found to cool the engine and still maintain some sense of design. Dave Cook, another person who has an excellent feel for motors and technology, has his pet way of cooling the motor. And I don't have a close-up picture, but you can see there's a hole on top of the fuselage. I believe Paul Walker does that too. Jimmy Casale's planes have what's known as a dolphin hole on top. A lot of the ships, these are Scott Smith's Cascades, it's a 35 size and a 60 size. He has plans to both of those, by the way. I have plans. What am I talking about? Anyway, different ways of cooling the motor. If the cooling is inadequate, you're going to run into problems. Motor cooling is probably a very misunderstood phenomenon. When you want a motor to run correctly, it has to maintain a certain temperature. It can't maintain that temperature if it's not getting adequate cooling air. Now, one of the ways Jim Greenaway has used is a V deflector, and of course you can get a set of Pattern Master or Cardinal plans and check this out. This would be the motor mounts. Okay, the motor would sit here, and what happens is you're in a low pressure zone on the fuselage side. In a Cardinals, there's only one big vent. But in either case, air should not come in through a gigantic hole. It should come in through a hole that's about 1.5 inches square. That's a number I found comfortable to work with. It should be forced around the engine on both sides and then exit. It should not have restrictions. block in the way. All the symptoms that you'll find of losing the motor run, destroying engines, a lot of bad things happen when cooling is inadequate, especially in the summer. Now, one of the things I constantly think of when I think of cooling is if the hole in the front is too big, and I've done this, if you have a giant scoop and a very little exit, air goes in, but it doesn't come out. It's like the Roach Motel. The best is to have a relatively small hole in the front and a relatively big hole or more than one hole in the back, so that air is in a low pressure zone here and it constantly gets sucked out. That's the best of all worlds, is to have a lot bigger hole in the back than in the front. You'll always have a lot of good air going around the engine. Worst is to have a big giant scoop in the front and a little hole in the back. Now nothing's going to come out. And it's just going to make an air dam up here, and the motor, the air around the motor is going to get constantly overheated. Motor is going to be, definitely the lifespan of the motor is going to get hurt. There's a lot of other ways of dealing with this. Obviously, sticking the head of the motor out will help a little bit. Not running a restrictive muffler, a muffler that restricts the engine too much will create too much heat. Running high nitro creates a lot of heat. But the worst offender is not having enough cooling air. That's the one that absolutely kills the program. So you want to try to design in enough air outlet space and get that scoop in the front or hole adequate. You certainly wouldn't want to block off the front of the motor and have no scoop. That certainly wouldn't work. So try to get a balance between the intake scoop and a bigger outboard scoop, and you'll have no problems with cooling. Let's try to get used to listening to the motor and listening for the sound of a motor that's overheating, overpropped, or under too much of a load. You go to hit the Wingover, and then it whoo and goes down. It's either overheating, overpropped, sagging, whatever. In loops, the sound would be Get used to listening for that sound. It might be overheating. Now, if you do the loops and this comes out and stays in a 2-cycle for a half a lap before it goes back to a 4-cycle, you know for sure you're overheating. Get some outlet duct area to cure that. That's a good way to cure it. Real easy, quick way to cure it. Get some more cooling outlet area. For anybody who's never seen a Rabe rudder is nothing more than a little horn that attaches to the elevator. And then on the rudder, let's pretend this is the rudder, there's a little bit of a horn, and it's connected with a push rod. And again, the dimensions of all these components can be gotten off Bearcat plans, Jim Greenaway's Pattern Master plans. You can get the ratios and numbers, but I can tell you right now, no matter what numbers you use, you'll need some fine tuning. Billy Simons had an adjustable rudder, a Rabe rudder. The Red Baron had a Rabe rudder. This is an excellent way to control GP. Keep the plane from yawing and wiggling. It's an excellent way. It worked well on the Griffin. It worked well on the Red Baron. It worked well on several of the red planes that I've come out with. I've never seen a downside to this other than it just being a little bit of an inconvenience to hook it up. It can be retrofit to planes from time to time. Bill Rich has used these on all his planes as far as I know. It's a really nice option you might want to consider, especially if you're going to have a plane that you expect to run a big diameter prop. Who says he can't spell? Big diameter prop, this would be a good option. Small diameter prop, not as necessary, but definitely, this definitely will help you in this part of the square 8. It'll be solid as a rock. When you go to do the vertical 8 up here, it'll just kick in like an afterburner. When you do the hourglass right here, it'll be solid as a rock. And if it isn't, you just click one turn in on a rudder and create yourself some free line tension. There's no real downside to it. It's worked well on every plane I have. I don't have a single reason not to use a Rabe rudder. Okay, I just want to show this on the video. This is the back end of the Rabe rudder. This is the Red Baron. This is a small little RC link. Goes up to a push rod that eventually gets buried in the inside of the elevator. And the way this works, if you just bear with me, is you can see the rudder moving out. On down, the rudder moves out. In neutral, it's almost in neutral, and on up, it goes back to full neutral. It never goes to inside turn. So on down, again, it goes way out. At neutral, it's about at neutral, but not quite. And on up, it goes almost to neutral. This is a really, really effective way of controlling GP. This, of course, is the Red Baron. And without saying any more, all I can say is it's a very fine flying airplane. And we may get to see this guy at the Nationals again. He flew well enough to... hey, let's be honest, I thought he should have won. Anyway, I think I should win every year. Who cares? It really did have a lot of merit, and I really do look forward to flying this guy again. And that Rabe rudder is one of the reasons it flies well. Let's say that this is our flight path. And this is the way the wind is blowing. A concept I want to at least discuss for a minute is called weather vaning. Weather vaning means that as you fly into the wind, right here, if the ship is here, let's use the blue pen. If the ship is here, more of the airplane is exposed to the, and this is the center of gravity. You can see that the wind is going to tend to blow the tail inside the circle. It's going to take the plane as you come downwind and want to do that as it flies around. Now as it gets to this side of the circle, because the center of gravity, the side area distribution and center of gravity, it's going to tend to push the plane away from you so that the plane is constantly going to be moving. It's not going to hold level flight. Now what's wrong with this, the problem here, it's real easy to understand, is as the plane moves in this plane, in at you, out at you, in at you, out at you, it's constantly changing neutral at the handle because the bell crank is not staying the same. It's the equivalent of moving the bell crank just a little bit. So what happens is when you have a plane that weather vanes, typically planes that weather vane have a lot of side area and a lot of side area behind the CG. What happens is it gets down here, the nose goes out, it's the equivalent of moving the bell crank a few degrees. So it's almost impossible now to fly level flight. You get here and it goes, you get here, it's good. So, the phenomenon is known as weather vaning. When a ship weather vanes, it's really difficult to hold in level flight. The problem is the side area balance is wrong, or side area too great. Let's take a real quick look at this. If we had a ship, let's say the typical Nobler ship, okay, and the area was adequate, but now we took and made the area tremendous, especially in back of the plane. If we added all this area, well, hell, it would just go crazy weather vaning all the time. On the other hand, if we took a ship and made it very sleek and narrow, maybe like an Aeron, it'd hardly weather vane at all. But because it didn't have adequate side area, we might lose some line tension. So obviously what I'm saying is there's a balance. There's an amount of area, an amount of area distribution that's at an optimum. And more than that is no good, less than that is no good. Finding that balance, the easiest way is look around at designs that fly well. An Ares, a Nobler. Go right up the list of Juno, Pattern Master, whatever you feel is a good flying plane. If it flies well and doesn't weather vane, the side area distribution and total area are probably pretty close to being correct, and you can use that in the future for your designs. It's a good place to start. But keep in mind, a way I've gotten around weather vaning, I've had ships that had big rudders like so, to Killer B for one, and when they weather vaned, I cut the top of the rudder off. I just totally chopped the top of the rudder off. They still weather vane, but less. I took a little more. I did this right at the field with a Zona saw. Then when I found an amount that was correct and it didn't weather vane, I went home, got out the sandpaper, radiused it all off, and I wound up with a correct amount. But certainly too much is worse than not enough. Not enough is a problem, but too much is a real problem. So be aware you can do that right at the field. And I have plenty of examples of planes that I've cut the rudder down on. There's no shortage of those around the house. And don't be afraid to cut into that puppy and get some real performance out of it. It also helps the plane. You can knock off a little bit of weight and obviously kill off some nose weight at the same time. I want to talk about tip weight here for a second too. These are important concepts. We're talking about tip weight. There's always a zone, and the zone is probably 1/4 to a 1/2 ounce. There's a comfortable zone where you will get really good performance in that zone. When you exceed that zone, where things are not enough, a typical thing that happens with too much tip weight is the wingtip bangs. When I say bangs, it comes around the last corner and drops the outboard tip. We've all seen that. At the point at which the wingtip bangs, we can't add or take away tip weight. We can't add anymore. We have to then take some away until the problem goes away. Now, if we still can't get the aligned tension we want, and we've taken out the wingtip weight to keep it from banging, then the only choice is to shorten the lines. See, now it's an advanced thing to think about. We're making more than one trim change at once. In other words, if we have the tip weight correct, plane is not banging a wing, it's not going slack. At this point it bangs the wing, we take some tip weight out. Now we can't get the tension we need, we have to shorten the lines. Okay, another thing is going to be, now Bobby Hunt is my favorite one for this. Bob Hunt flew one of my red planes and he screamed and yelled that his arm was getting too long because it had excessive tension. Too much tension is no good either. You want an amount that keeps the plane out there. Typically, maybe whatever amount we're used to. The way I trim my plane, and from having flown Paul Walker's plane back in '83, I can tell you he pretty much trims the way I do, and the way Jimmy Casale does. We all have these planes that really pull your arm off. On the other hand, Billy Werwidge, Bobby Hunt, and Bob Barron trim to the other way, where tension is very light but steady. So keep in mind, if it's too much, you want to go to a little bit less tip weight. Not enough tension, typical problem with not enough tip weight, lack of tension somewhere. Typically above 45. Okay, top of the hourglass soft. Okay, overhead 8 soft. Remember those drawings we made before? When the overhead 8 starts to get to be a problem and you can't get through, one of the first things to look at is more tip weight as the answer. There's really no other way I know of to get better tension in the overhead 8 other than motor offset or more tip weight, and a lot of times it's easier just to add tip weight. Now, a nice way to do this, a real nice way to do this and make little fine adjustments without constantly turning the plane on its back and all the other things that go along, scratching the rudder and having somebody hold the plane, and that is to carry a little can of children's clay with you and just paste it on the outboard wing with finger pressure until you find the amount you need, then take it out. Obviously, either at that point in time put it in a tip weight box, or cut a piece of lead, weigh it on a gram scale, cut a piece of lead and put it in the tip. It's a lot easier than constantly taking a box on and off, on and off, on and off 1,000 times. A problem with putting clay into the tip weight boxes in real hot weather, it'll melt on you and you'll just have mushy pies in there. So better to cut a piece of lead, drill a hole in it, and handle it that way. Now, one other thing to mention here is when you don't have enough tip weight, the first obvious thing that happens is the rounds become eggs. When rounds become eggs, suspect you might not have enough tip weight. First thing to check for. Now, one of the things you're going to find out somewhere down trimming out a ship is you're going to want a thing called more corner. You have a plane, it flies relatively well, but the corner is kind of mushy. You'd like it to be a little harder corner. Move the center of gravity back. These are things to try in the order that probably would make a significant change. Okay, tape the hinge lines. That can be very significant. Smaller diameter prop, assuming it'll pull the plane. All things that will contribute to more corner. Moving the lead outs forward. And obviously the inverse of this is true. There's no point even putting the inverse, the opposite, on video. The opposite of this, if you wanted less corner and more stability, would be to CG forward, take the tape off the hinge lines, use a bigger diameter prop, lead outs forward. These are just directions to go in. Directions to go in when you want more corner. Biggest one that's going to give you corner. Solid lines will add a dramatic amount of corner to most airplanes. Okay. The handle. Larger line spacing. Look, he spelled handle wrong. What a bozo. Handle larger. Typical thing on a handle, if you're using a Pro Stun handle, move the cable out one notch. The cable out here will give you more corner than if the cable was in here. That's why we have it adjustable. Another thing that will contribute to more corner is cut a little bit off the arms of the handle. Just take a Zonosaur and cut it right off and replace the cable. Shorter arms, more corner. This would give you the least amount of corner. This would give you the most if you just had very short arms like this. Least corner, best rounds, medium, most corner, probably violent rounds. Keep in mind, as you're trading away, to get more corner, you're probably trading away some stability too. So these are things you want to keep in balance, obviously. You don't want to have a plane that all it does is corner, but it won't pull out flat. Okay, the larger handle is a significant thing. The solid line's obviously a significant thing. A lot of times, as a last resort, these are last resort things, is make the flaps smaller. I remember Lou McFarlane's Shark, he cut the ends. In other words, his flap would be this long. He cut the last part off to get more corner and just glued this stationary. Smaller flaps, more corner. Big flaps, less corner. Another thing that I have done in the past is I've changed the control ratio so that the flaps move less. These are last resort. Change the ratio at the tail horn. If the tail horn has a hole, you can probably move at the tail horn, move the bushing slightly up away from the original hole, get one right in there, and that'll give you more elevated deflection and less flap deflection. So in effect, you'll have smaller flaps and still have the area and make and generate the amount of lift. Okay. All of these things combined, though, if you take the whole package, you're not looking for just a plane that the only thing it does well is corner. You want to balance it against the round maneuvers. You'd like to have the best of all worlds. The best of all worlds is when the CG is in the proper spot. The hinge lines are probably going to be taped, especially if it's a heavy plane. You're using the smallest diameter prop that'll pull the airplane through the top of the hourglass. The lead outs are as far forward as they can go, and the plane will still fly well in level flight and in inverted flight. Obviously, solid lines are a personal preference thing, and handle. This you have to suit to your needs, and it goes without saying line length plays a factor there. And hopefully you've chosen a design, or you've designed it yourself, where the flaps are the right size and shape and the control ratio is correct. And this should result in a plane that has a really good corner. Not only a good corner, but it comes out and stays flat. Not a great corner and it comes out and goes like that. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, and knowing the things that will contribute to more corner are definitely going to help you. A general rule of thumb is a heavy airplane will definitely corner better than a lighter one because of the line tension it generates. I've never seen a light plane that cornered as good as a heavy one. The lighter planes that I've seen seem a little soft on corner. They may make up for it in vertical tension, but heavy planes always seem to have a really good corner. Again, my opinion. I'm sure other people have opposite opinions, but If you try some of each, you'll eventually find something that suits your needs well. Now obviously I've tried to present a little bit of information in a very low-key way on trimming airplanes, various ways of trimming them, and I hope you've enjoyed watching the better part of this video. Keep in mind we're going to make an ongoing set of these videos, and the next one should be available soon. This is tape 2 of the set so far on trim. This is a little wall in my shop if you've watched any of the Nobler videos, and obviously that's a good place to get some information. You can see that what I've done is I have templates for virtually everything I ever make, notes, pads with notes, constantly keep track of what I'm doing, keep master copies of all the videos for my own reference, and by doing this it allows me to upgrade each model, make each one a little bit better, a little bit more aerodynamic, vertical CG better. And I really hope from this video, from this set of videos, many people will continue to enjoy the stunt event or make their flying better. Obviously take advantage of every source of knowledge you can. If you know somebody that's an expert flyer, go flying with them, launch their plane, see how they do things, volunteer to judge some meets. In every way, try to take advantage of the knowledge that's available. Get a grain scale, start weighing your wood. Keep patterns of things. These are all 16th plywood, by the way. Keep patterns of things. Have a little inventory of, like I have a little inventory of bolts and nuts and things, so you don't lose a whole day because you don't have a set of 440 bolts. Keep a little inventory of things. And by doing that, I think absolutely for sure you'll move right up the stunt ranks faster than you expect.